The words came between the eulogy and the closing prayer, delivered in my stepmother's perfectly modulated voice, the one she used for garden club meetings and charity luncheons. She stood near my father's casket, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, and said, "Of course, I'll need to sell the house quickly. Far too much space for one person, and the market is excellent right now." I was sitting in the front pew of St. Michael's Episcopal Church in Westchester County, wearing the black dress I'd bought 3 days ago when the hospital called to say my father had hours, not days. My half-sister Lily sat beside our stepmother, nodding sympathetically, already performing the role of supportive daughter. And I sat frozen, my father's death certificate still warm in my purse, listening to Diane announce her plans to sell the only home I'd ever known. The house where my mother had planted rose bushes in the garden. The house where I'd learned to ride a bike in the circular driveway. The house where my father had promised, the night my mother died, that nothing would ever change, that this would always be my home. My name is Claire Northrup. I'm 29 years old. And I had just learned that my father's promises died with him. My mother passed away when I was 12. Cancer, aggressive, and merciless. She'd made it to my 6th grade graduation in May, and by August she was gone. My father, Thomas Northrup, had been a successful corporate attorney, the kind who worked 70-hour weeks and measured love in the size of the house he provided and the quality of the schools he could afford. He grieved in his own way. Quietly. Privately. By burying himself deeper in work and emerging 18 months later with Diane Richards, a widow with a 10-year-old daughter named Lily. They married quickly, a small ceremony at City Hall that I wasn't invited to because it was just paperwork. Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. Diane moved into our house with her daughter and her furniture and her ideas about how things should be done. She didn't erase my mother's memory exactly. She just carefully relocated it. Photos moved from the living room to my bedroom. My mother's china packed away for safekeeping. The rose bushes replaced with a more modern landscape design. "Your father needs to move forward," she told me when I was 13, watching the gardeners dig up my mother's roses. Living in the past helps no one. I'd learned early to keep quiet, to not make waves, to be grateful that my father had found companionship, even if that companionship meant I increasingly felt like a guest in my own home. Now I was 29. I'd built a career as a freelance architectural photographer, traveling for work, coming back to Westchester between assignments because my father always insisted I stay with them instead of getting a hotel. "This is your home," he'd say, even as Diane gave me the tight smile that said she was counting the days until I left again. The funeral reception was held at the house. Our house. The house where I'd grown up. Except Diane was already calling it the property in conversations with her friends, discussing square footage and recent comparable sales, as if my father's body wasn't even cold yet. I stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen where my mother had taught me to make chocolate chip cookies, and listened to Diane hold court in the living room. "The housing market is incredibly strong right now," she was telling someone. "My real estate agent thinks we could list next week. No point in waiting." I said, stepping into the doorway. The conversation stopped. Diane turned, her expression shifting to something that might have passed for sympathy if you didn't know what to look for. "Claire, darling. You should eat something. You look pale. You said we could list next week." "Who is we?" "Lily and I, of course. This house is far too large for one person, and frankly, the memories are difficult. Your father would want me to be practical. My father loved this house. Your father's gone." Her voice remained gentle, but her eyes had gone hard. "And we need to be realistic about our situation." A man cleared his throat behind me. I turned to see Harold Edelstein, my father's attorney and longtime friend, standing in the hallway. He was in his mid-60s, with the kind of face that had seen too many family disputes to be surprised by anything. "Diane, might I have a word?" "In the study?" "This really isn't the time, Harold." "I'm afraid it is exactly the time. The will needs to be discussed. All interested parties should be present." He looked at me. "Claire, you should join us. Lily as well." Diane's smile tightened. "Surely that can wait until after the reception." "It's waited long enough." Harold's tone was polite but firm. "The study. Now, please." We filed into my father's study, the room that had always smelled of leather and old books and the pipe tobacco he pretended he didn't still smoke occasionally. Harold took the seat behind the desk, the position of authority. Diane and Lily sat on the leather sofa. I took the chair by the window, the one where I used to sit and do homework while my father worked late into the evening. Harold opened his briefcase and removed a blue folder. Thomas updated his will 6 months ago. I strongly advised him to discuss these changes with you both beforehand, but he felt it would be easier to handle after the fact. 6 months ago? Diane's voice had lost its gentle modulation. He didn't mention anything about updating his will. No, he wouldn't have. He wanted to ensure everything was finalized before bringing it to your attention. Harold put on his reading glasses. I'll summarize the key points rather than read the entire document. Thomas was very specific about his wishes. He looked at me. Claire, your father has left you the house. The property at 47 Meadowbrook Lane, including all structures and the surrounding 2 acres, is yours, free and clear. The mortgage was paid off last year. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people processing information, but the sharp silence of shock. That's impossible, Diane said. This is our marital home. I have rights. The house was never part of the marital estate, Harold continued calmly. Thomas purchased the property before your marriage, and he never added your name to the deed. The prenuptial agreement you signed specifically excluded this property from any claims you might make on his estate. Prenuptial agreement? I said. Harold glanced at Diane. You didn't know about the prenup? My father never mentioned it. No, he wouldn't have. It wasn't your concern. He returned his attention to the folder. Diane, you've been provided for. The apartment in Manhattan is yours, as is the investment portfolio Thomas established for you. The liquid assets have been divided according to the prenuptial agreement, which was quite generous. You'll receive approximately $1.2 million, plus the Manhattan property, which is valued at roughly $800,000. Diane's face had gone white. That's insane. I was married to him for 15 years. This house alone is worth $4 million. The house was never yours, Harold said simply. It belonged to Thomas, and now it belongs to Claire. Those were his explicit wishes. I couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, too hot. I'd expected nothing. For years, I'd assumed Diane would inherit everything, and I'd be left with whatever she deemed appropriate to give me. I'd made peace with that. I'd built my own life, my own career, specifically so I wouldn't need anything from my father's estate. What about me? Lily's voice was small, younger than her 27 years. You've been left a trust fund of $250,000 to be distributed over 5 years. Your stepfather wanted to ensure you had financial security. A trust fund? That's it. Diane stood up, her composure finally cracking. He leaves his own daughter millions in real estate and my daughter gets a trust fund? Lily is not his daughter, Harold said. She's his stepdaughter. Thomas was generous to include her at all. This is unacceptable. I'll contest this. You signed a prenuptial agreement, Diane. One that you reviewed with your own attorney before the wedding. One that specifically states you waive any claim to property Thomas owned prior to the marriage. You can contest all you want, but you'll lose, and you'll spend considerable money on legal fees in the process. Diane's hands were shaking. He promised me. When we got married, he promised I'd never have to worry about money. And you won't. $2 million in assets is hardly poverty. But she gets the house. Diane pointed at me, and for the first time since my father married her, I saw something real in her face. Not the careful mask of the gracious stepmother, but genuine rage. The girl who barely visits, who couldn't be bothered to come home more than twice a year, she gets everything. I was working, I said quietly. I came home whenever I could. You left. You always left. While I was here, taking care of him, managing this house, being a wife to him. The house was never yours to manage, Harold interrupted. Thomas made that very clear in his will. He also left a letter for Claire. I was instructed to give it to her privately, but given the circumstances, I think it's relevant now. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to me. My father's handwriting on the front. To Claire. To be opened after my death. My hands trembled as I opened it. The The letter was 3 pages long, written in my father's careful script. "My dearest Claire," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Harold has done his job of making sure you understand my wishes. I know this will come as a surprise. I should have told you years ago, but I was a coward about confronting difficult truths, especially where Diane was concerned. The house is yours. It was always meant to be yours. Your mother and I bought it together before you were born. Every brick, every room, every inch of that garden was chosen with you in mind. When she died, I promised her I would keep it for you. That no matter what happened, no matter who I married, this house would remain your inheritance. I made mistakes after your mother passed. I was lonely, and I let that loneliness drive me into a marriage that was more about convenience than love. Diane is not a bad woman, but she's not the right woman for this house. She never understood what it meant to you, to your mother, to our family. The prenuptial agreement was non-negotiable. Diane signed it because she wanted the lifestyle I could provide, the status of being Mrs. Thomas Northrop. She knew the terms. She chose to accept them. I'm leaving you the house because it's yours. It was always yours. And I'm leaving you enough money to maintain it, to pay the taxes, to keep it in the family. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve this. You are my daughter. You are your mother's daughter. This is your home. I'm sorry I wasn't a better father. I'm sorry I let work consume me. I'm sorry I chose convenience over truly seeing you. But I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped wanting you to have the life your mother and I dreamed of for you. The house is yours. Do with it what you will. But know that it was given with love, with intention, and with the hope that you'll find happiness within its walls. All my love, Dad." I couldn't read the last paragraph through my tears. Real tears, not the dry performance Diane had given at the funeral. Tears for the father I'd had and the father I'd lost, and the father who'd tried, in his own flawed way, to keep a promise to my mother. Harold let me cry. Diane stood frozen, her face a mask of fury. Lily looked down at her hands, uncomfortable with the emotion filling the room. "This isn't over," Diane finally said. "I don't care what piece of paper he signed. I was his wife. I have rights." "You have exactly the rights outlined in your prenuptial agreement," Harold replied. "Which, I might add, are quite generous. Many women in your position would receive far less. I want this house. The house is not yours to want." Diane turned to me. "You can't possibly plan to keep it. You don't even live in New York. You're gone half the year for work. It makes no sense." I folded my father's letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "Whether it makes sense isn't your concern. So you're just going to let it sit empty? That's incredibly wasteful. What I do with my house is my decision." "Your house." She said it like the words tasted bitter. "You swooped in at the end, and suddenly you're the grieving daughter, and everything falls into your lap." "I didn't swoop in. I was called to the hospital when Dad was dying. Where were you?" The question landed hard. Diane's face flushed. "I was handling the arrangements. Someone had to be practical. You were meeting with your real estate agent while he was in hospice. The nurse told me. She thought you were incredibly cold." "How dare you?" "Ladies," Harold stood. "This is neither the time nor the place. Diane, I suggest you consult with your attorney about your options, though I'll tell you now that contesting this will is futile. Claire, I need you to sign some paperwork, but it can wait until next week. For now, I suggest we all take some time to process this information." He left the study. Lily followed quickly, clearly desperate to escape the tension. Diane remained, staring at me with undisguised hatred. "You think you've won," she said. "This isn't a competition. Everything is a competition. And you just took everything I've worked for. You married my father. You didn't work for this house. I managed this household for 15 years. I hosted his colleagues. I attended his firm's events. I played the role of the perfect wife while you were off gallivanting around the world taking pictures. I built a career. You built a lifestyle. There's a difference." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "You have no idea what it's like. To be the second wife. To live in a dead woman's shadow. To know that every time your husband looks at you, he's comparing you to someone you can never measure up to." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Then why did you stay?" "Because I thought eventually I'd earn my place here. I thought 15 years would be enough. I thought. She trailed off, blinking rapidly. It doesn't matter what I thought. You could have loved me, I said quietly. You could have been kind to me. You could have treated this like a home instead of an investment property. Maybe then my father would have felt differently. Your father never felt anything except guilt and obligation. He married me because he needed someone to manage his life. He stayed married to me because divorce was inconvenient. And he left you this house because he never stopped punishing himself for your mother's death. She walked out, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors, leaving me alone in my father's study with a letter that explained everything and changed nothing. If you've ever been in a situation where someone's death reveals truths that the living kept hidden, you'll understand why the days after that meeting felt surreal. The funeral reception continued downstairs. People ate finger sandwiches and told stories about my father's brilliance in the courtroom, his dedication to his clients, his generous spirit. None of them knew that upstairs, his will had just torn apart what remained of his family. The reception ended around 7. Guests departed with murmured condolences, promising to call soon, to get together, to stay in touch. The kind of promises people make at funerals and rarely keep. By 8, only Diane, Lily, and I remained. We stood in the kitchen, 3 women connected by a man who was gone, with nothing left to say to each other. When do you need me to leave? Diane finally asked, her voice flat. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. Well, think quickly. I need to make arrangements. The will said you have the Manhattan apartment. A 1-bedroom in Murray Hill. Hardly adequate. It's more than most people have. She laughed, sharp and bitter. Spoken like someone who's never had to worry about money. Your father made sure you never needed anything. My father paid for college. After that, I supported myself. With the safety net of knowing you had this house to fall back on. I didn't know I had this house. I thought you'd inherit everything. And you were fine with that? You weren't angry. I thought about the answer. I was sad. I was hurt. But I wasn't surprised. You were his wife. It made sense. But secretly you hoped, didn't you? Secretly you wanted him to choose you over me. I wanted him to love me. The house had nothing to do with it. Diane picked up her purse from the counter. I'll be gone by the end of the month. That should give you plenty of time to enjoy your inheritance. She left through the front door. Lily followed without saying goodbye, and I was alone in the house for the first time since my father died. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them with new eyes. Not as Diane's carefully curated showplace, but as my mother's home. The home she'd chosen, the home she'd loved, the home she'd wanted me to have. In the living room, I found the box where Diane had stored my mother's photos. 15 years tucked away in the hall closet, hidden but not thrown away. I opened the box and pulled out a picture of my mother in the garden, kneeling beside her rose bushes, dirt on her hands and joy on her face. I sat on the floor and cried. For my mother, who died too young. For my father, who'd tried in his broken way to honor her memory. For the years I'd spent feeling unwelcome in my own home. And for the relief, the overwhelming relief of knowing it was mine now. Truly mine. And no one could take it away. The next week passed in a blur of paperwork. I met with Harold 3 times, signing documents, transferring titles, establishing accounts. The house was officially mine, along with a trust fund my father had set up to cover taxes, maintenance, and repairs. He'd thought of everything, planned for every contingency. Your father was meticulous, Harold told me. He updated this will 6 months ago, right after his cancer diagnosis. He wanted to make sure everything was in order. He knew he was dying and didn't tell me. He didn't want you to worry. He thought he had more time. He always thought he had more time. Harold removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Your father loved you, Claire. He wasn't good at showing it, but he loved you. This house is proof of that. I wish he'd just told me. I wish we'd talked about it. He was a lawyer. He expressed love through documents and provisions. It's all he knew how to do. Diane moved out 3 weeks after the funeral. She hired movers who packed everything methodically, removing all traces of her 15-year residence. She took furniture she'd brought into the marriage. She took art she'd purchased. She took kitchen equipment and linens and bathroom accessories. She stripped the house of everything she considered hers, leaving spaces that looked ransacked. I didn't fight her on any of it. I didn't want her things. I wanted the house itself, the structure, the bones of the place where I'd grown up. The last time I saw her, she was standing in the driveway next to a moving truck, looking up at the house with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I hope you're happy here," she said. "I don't know if I will be. But it's mine to figure out. He never loved me, you know. Not really. I was just the woman who filled the space your mother left behind." "I'm sorry. That must have been lonely." She looked at me surprised. "You're actually sorry? You wasted 15 years on someone who couldn't love you back. That's sad. I got $2 million and an apartment in Manhattan. Hardly a tragedy." "If you say so." She got into her car and drove away without looking back. Lily had already left 2 days earlier, texting me a simple goodbye and nothing more. We'd never been close, and my father's will had ensured we never would be. I spent the next month alone in the house, walking through empty rooms, hearing them echo. I hired contractors to repair the damage Diane had done when she removed her furniture. I painted walls. I refinished floors. I slowly transformed the space from Diane's showpiece back into something that felt like home. My mother's photos went back up in the living room. Her china came out of storage and filled the dining room cabinets. I hired a landscaper to put rose bushes back in the garden, the same variety my mother had planted 30 years ago. One afternoon, I was in the garden planting the last rose bush when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Claire Northrup." "Yes. This is Detective Sarah Chin with the Westchester County District Attorney's Office. I'm calling about your stepmother, Diane Northrup." My hands went still on the rose bush. "What about her?" "We've been investigating some financial irregularities related to your father's estate. I was hoping you might be willing to answer some questions." "What kind of irregularities?" "It appears Diane may have been systematically withdrawing funds from your father's accounts over the past 3 years. Large amounts. We're trying to determine if your father was aware of these withdrawals or if they constituted theft." I sat back on my heels, processing this information. "How much money are we talking about?" "Nearly $800,000. The number hung in the air between us. $800,000. Almost the entire value of the Manhattan apartment Diane had been so bitter about receiving. "When can we meet?" I asked. Detective Chin came to the house 2 days later. She was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and direct. She sat in my father's study, the same room where Harold had read the will and spread bank statements across the desk. "These withdrawals started 3 years ago," she explained, pointing to highlighted entries. "Always in amounts just under $10,000, which is the reporting threshold for banks. Always transferred to an account in Diane's name only." Was my father aware? That's what we're trying to determine. The account these funds came from was one he rarely accessed. It was established as an emergency fund, essentially forgotten money. Diane had access as his wife, and she systematically drained it. "Why are you investigating now?" "My father's dead." "Because another family member reported suspicious activity." "Your half-sister, Lily." I leaned back in my chair. "Lily reported her own mother?" "Lily called us after the will was read. She said her mother had told her not to worry about the trust fund, that she'd handled things and they'd be fine." When Lily pressed for details, Diane admitted she'd been moving money into a separate account that wouldn't be part of the estate. "So Diane knew exactly what she was doing?" "Yes. And she likely thought she'd inherit everything and no one would ever review these accounts carefully. When you inherited the house instead, she panicked. That's probably why she's been so aggressive about her portion of the estate." Detective Chin pulled out another document. "We've frozen the Manhattan apartment transfer pending the investigation. If we determine this was theft, Diane will need to return the funds. That may mean selling the apartment to cover what she stole. She'll fight this. She already is. Her attorney is claiming your father gave her verbal permission to access those funds. The problem is, there's no documentation supporting that claim, and the systematic nature of the withdrawals suggests otherwise." I looked at the bank statements, seeing my father's money disappear in neat increments. 10,000 here. 9,000 there. For 3 years. While he worked long hours and worried about leaving me and Diane provided for. while he planned his will and ensured I'd have the house, while Diane positioned herself as the devoted wife. What do you need from me? Anything you remember about your father's finances? Whether he ever mentioned these accounts? Whether Diane discussed money with him in your presence? Whether you noticed any signs she was worried about finances? I thought back over the years. Diane always dressed well, always had fresh flowers in the house, always hired the best caterers, the most expensive landscapers, the top-tier services for everything. But my father had been wealthy, and I'd assumed his income covered her spending. She remodeled the kitchen 2 years ago, I said slowly. My father wasn't happy about it. He said it was unnecessary, that the kitchen was fine. She did it anyway. He stopped arguing after a while. How much did the remodel cost? I don't know. But she used Italian marble and custom cabinets. It was extensive. Detective Chin made notes. That matches the timeline of increased withdrawals. She was funding her lifestyle with stolen money. We talked for another hour. I gave her what details I could remember, signed statements, provided contact information. When she left, I sat in the study for a long time, thinking about Diane. About her bitterness at the will reading. About her insistence that she'd worked for this house, that she'd earned her place. She'd been stealing from my father while he was alive. While he trusted her. While he was dying and trying to ensure everyone would be provided for. And she'd been furious when his will prevented her from stealing more. 3 months after the funeral, Diane was charged with grand larceny. The case made the local papers, though not the headlines. Widow charged with stealing from deceased husband's estate. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal. Return of the funds, probation, no jail time in exchange for a guilty plea. The Manhattan apartment was sold. The proceeds went to reimburse my father's estate. Diane moved to a small rental in Queens. Lily stopped speaking to her mother entirely and reached out to me with a hesitant text. I'm sorry. I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to figure out what, if anything, I owed to the girl who'd been my stepsister for 15 years, but never really my family. Eventually, I wrote back, your mother made her choices. You made yours. I appreciate you doing the right thing. Can we meet for coffee sometime? I thought about it. About extending something that might become forgiveness, or might just become another complicated family relationship. But maybe that was okay. Maybe complicated was better than nothing. Sure. Coffee sounds good. 6 months after my father's funeral, I was working in the garden when a car pulled into the driveway. I didn't recognize it at first, then Lily emerged, looking nervous and carrying a cardboard box. Hi, she said. I found some things when I was cleaning out storage. I thought you might want them. She set the box down on the porch steps. Inside were photo albums. Wedding photos of my mother and father. Baby pictures of me. Birthday parties and holidays and ordinary moments captured on film. My mother had these, Lily explained. She kept them in storage. I don't think she meant to hide them exactly. She just didn't want them in the house. I pulled out an album and opened it. My mother, young and laughing, pregnant with me. My father, less gray and less tired, his arm around her shoulders. Thank you, I said, my voice thick. There's something else. Lily reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. A letter my mother wrote but never sent. To you. She gave it to me before the plea deal. She said you should have it. I took the envelope, feeling its weight. Have you read it? No. It's not my letter. We stood there, 2 women connected by a complicated history, unsure what came next. Do you want to stay for coffee? I asked. Are you sure? No. But maybe that's okay. She smiled, tentative but real. Coffee sounds good. We sat on the porch, drinking coffee from my mother's china, talking about small things. Her new job. My photography projects. The weather. Nothing profound. Just the beginning of something that might eventually become a relationship built on choice rather than obligation. After she left, I opened Diane's letter. It was short, written in her careful handwriting. Claire, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to understand why I did what I did. When your father married me, I thought I was getting security. A life free from worry. A family. Instead, I got a husband who was still in love with his dead wife and a stepdaughter who would always have first claim on his heart. I took the money because I thought I'd earned it. 15 years of being second best. 15 years of managing a house that was never really mine. 15 years of knowing that no matter what I did, I'd never be enough. I was wrong. I know that now. The money didn't make me feel more secure. It just made me someone I didn't recognize. Someone who would steal from a dying man because she couldn't accept that he'd loved someone else more. You have your mother's house. You have your father's love. You have everything I wanted and could never have. I could hate you for that. But mostly I'm just tired. I hope you find happiness in that house. I hope it brings you more peace than it ever brought me. And I hope you never make the mistake of believing that money or property or status can fill the space where love should be. Diane. I folded the letter and placed it in the box with my mother's photos. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. Diane had been broken in her own way, trying to fill her emptiness with things that could never satisfy. She'd spent 15 years competing with a ghost and lost. I thought about responding. About writing back and explaining that I understood, that I didn't hate her, that I hoped she'd find whatever it was she'd been looking for. But some letters don't need responses. Some confessions are just for the speaker, not the listener. Instead, I went back to the garden and finished planting the roses. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the lawn, making everything soft and forgiving. The house stood behind me, solid and real, filled with memories of two women who'd loved it for very different reasons. 1 year after my father's funeral, I hosted my first dinner party. Nothing elaborate. Just Maya, my best friend from college, and her husband. My childhood friend Rebecca and her partner, Lily, who'd become something like a real sister over the months of coffee dates and tentative conversations. We ate in the dining room, using my mother's china. We laughed and told stories and filled the house with noise and warmth. After everyone left, I walked through the rooms, seeing them not as a museum to my mother or a trophy I'd won from Diane, but as a home. My home. A place where I could build new memories while honoring old ones. I found my father's letter in my bedside drawer and read it again. The house is yours. Do with it what you will. But know that it was given with love, with intention, and with the hope that you'll find happiness within its walls. I had found happiness. Not in the inheritance itself, but in the freedom it represented. The knowledge that my father had seen me, had valued me, had wanted me to have something permanent and real. The understanding that I'd never been forgotten, even when I felt invisible. Diane's bitterness made sense now. She'd spent 15 years believing she was building security, only to discover she'd been a temporary resident in a house that was always meant to be mine. She'd taken money trying to create her own security, and in doing so, had lost what little she had. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the garden where rose bushes were beginning to bloom. My mother's roses, planted again after 15 years of absence. I made coffee in the kitchen I'd painted a soft yellow. I ate breakfast at the table where I'd done homework as a child. This was home. Not because my father left it to me in his will, but because I'd chosen to make it home again. To fill it with life and laughter and purpose. To honor my mother's memory while creating my own future. My phone buzzed with a text from my agent. A new photography assignment. 3 months in New Zealand shooting landscapes for a travel magazine. The kind of work I loved, the kind of adventure that had defined my 20s. I looked around the kitchen at the house that was finally, completely mine and smiled. I would take the assignment. I would travel and work and explore. And then I would come home. Because now I had a home to come back to, one that would be here when I returned. One that no one could take away. I texted back, "I'll take it. Send the details." Then I poured another cup of coffee and walked out to the garden. The morning air was cool and fresh. Birds sang in the trees my father had planted when I was a baby. The house stood solid behind me, its windows reflecting the rising sun. My mother had chosen this place with love. My father had protected it with intention. And I would live in it with gratitude. Not just for the house itself, but for what it represented. Permanence. Belonging. The knowledge that I was valued enough to inherit the one thing that mattered most. Diane had asked if I hoped to be happy here. The answer was yes. Not because the house was expensive or impressive or proof of my worth, but because it was mine, given with love, protected with care, and filled now with the life I was building, one day at a time, in the home that had always been waiting for me. There are more stories like mine, I thought, stories of inheritance and complicated families, of love expressed through wills and documents, because the living couldn't find the words. Stories of second wives and first daughters, and the messy reality of blended families where everyone wants to belong, but no one quite knows how. If my story feels familiar, if you've ever stood in a house that should have been home, but felt like foreign territory, if you've ever wondered what you were worth in someone's eyes, you're not alone. Sometimes the answer comes too late. Sometimes it comes in a letter read after a funeral. Sometimes it comes in a house left behind by someone who loved you the only way they knew how. And sometimes, that's enough.